for settling in. I also want to take a moment to thank our host, Compass Education Group, for sponsoring our new counselor webinar series. Um, Today, we will be obviously jumping into and talking about some of the details that go along with supporting our visually and performing art students. With us today will be Chuck Benedict from Savannah College of Art and Design, who will help navigate us and lead us through our presentation. Myself, Joaquin Hamilton from Germantown Academy, and also another faculty member from our new counselor group. And I'll let you introduce yourself, B.
Hi, everyone. B. Decker from St. Stephen's Episcopal in Austin, Texas.
All right. So we will be here to kind of guide you through the session. Again, as usual, if there's any questions, feel free to pop them, let them populate in the chat, or you can obviously raise your hand and we'll try to get to you through our session. Okay. Without further ado, sorry, I'm trying to juggle both. I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Chuck.
Hey everybody, my name is Chuck Benedict from the Savannah College of Art and Design. I'm Associate Director of Admission, which is a fancy way of saying I work with a lot of schools like y'all's. If I haven't worked with you personally, I'm confident that my colleagues have worked with at least some of you in some capacity. We are fairly travel heavy in our recruitment process, so we love working with the schools as much as possible. I've been with the school for a few years now. As I told Joaquin a few weeks ago, I love the arts, but I'm no artist myself, which makes this job kind of perfect for me because it gets me a little bit closer to it, but nobody has to look at my stick figures, which is, trust me, it's a good thing for everybody. So without further ado, we're going to get into it. So BFA, BA versus conservatories. All of these are going to offer specific pockets of education, and many of them will cover similar territory, but there are some pretty key differences in them. In terms of conservatories are typically less focused on providing a broad range of academics and are specifically focused on a particular area of the arts. An important note for many of the counselors out here is that for many students seeking a conservatory, more likely than not, they should be looking at the specific professors in these degrees of study rather than the school as the whole. The intensive aspect of this is going to be involving them working with specific teachers for many years at a time, and it's going to lack sort of those general education courses that a lot of other schools, sort of foundation years that many artistic institutions do require. And that's actually similar to the BFA. Same as the conservatory, a BFA tends to be a more intensive degree where a student takes a higher proportion of classes within their specific major. This is going to require, of course, those long hours in the studio. These classes are going to be very, very focused, which is where it really differs from the BA. The BA is going to be a bit more balanced in terms of the courses that they're going to take outside of their major, and often are going to require education in orbiting aspects of that specific industry. For example, a BA, you might get a BA in the performing arts, but a BFA would be more akin to a specific aspect of that industry, like film and television or acting for the stage. And a note about this, where I think it's important for counselors to understand, many liberal arts institutions are fantastic options for students who maybe don't want to totally monetize their artistic passions, or they don't want to make their hobbies into a job. You can still major in finance and get that BA in dramatic writing or something like that. So there really are tons of options out there for students. So in terms of application requirements, which is going to be important to understand that for most of these schools, it is not a one size fits all. Almost every institution is going to be looking for something different, and it's generally understood that while many schools will require similar items for a portfolio, there's no one standard portfolio like your typical Common App that can be submitted. So, especially in my role, I offer portfolio counseling, and I work with so many students who come to me stressed and anxious about what specifically we require versus other schools. Why do we do it one way, and why the schools all do it in another one? So a few notes on that. It is incredibly important to just be up to date with the school's website, with their counselors. More often than not, they will offer portfolio counseling, if not full-on portfolio reviews for them. And we'll talk about that here in a moment. But generally, more recent work is going to be preferred. If you've got excellent work that you did when you were a kindergartner, depending on what type of portfolio and what kind of school you're applying to, you might be able to submit that. But the general rule of thumb is freshman year at the earliest. Schools are going to want a variety of mediums specific to their intended major too. And this is another one that's just going to be different. They want to see their process, how students arrived at their final product, kind of like the classic math adage, show your work. How did you take that concept in your head and turn it into that final complete reality? Oftentimes, this is going to include opportunities for explanations of their work. A lot of times there is a background to the story that can add to sort of the value of the piece and give a lot of context. If a student does have an opportunity to explain their work, it's important to remember that it doesn't need to be a 10,000 word essay. Usually you should cap it at around 300 words. It should be short, it should be concise. Being mindful of the fact that the people looking at these portfolios are looking at a million others too. So advocate for yourself. The best way to advocate yourself in an explanation of a piece is being short and concise so that the person reviewing it really does have the opportunity to absorb all the information. It sounds kind of brutal, but the people looking at these portfolios aren't going to read 4,000 word essay about one specific piece, especially if you've got 10 pieces in your portfolio. We just have to be realistic with that, which can be rough for students because oftentimes the arts are so emotional and they pour their heart and soul into these pieces, but it is important to keep that in mind. Also included in this is going to be things like the size of the piece, materials you used, and the date that it was created. These are going to be important factors and stuff that you definitely want to include in that portfolio. Visual art portfolios are going to range in size in terms of how many pieces can be submitted. As little as 5 pieces are required for some, to as many as 27, I think is the largest I've seen, which is a huge body of work. There are gallery openings without 27 pieces in them. More often than not, this range is going to be from the 8 to 15 if they require it at all. I work with Savannah College of Art and Design, and we do not require portfolios. So again, it's just going to be a little bit different. All of these, however, are going to be focused on how the portfolio is presented. You want it to be as professional as possible. We don't need things in the background that are distracting us. We don't want to see your dresser and your Funko Pops hanging out there. If you can, hang a white sheet, get a lamp and point the light to get it nice and really showcase your work. If it is a sculpture or a fashion piece, and if it is a painting, most of the schools I work with are going to have computer labs where they can scan their work in, and it's important that those edges are cropped and nicely neat. to the specifications to whatever the school is asking for you to submit. And I really can't stress this enough. I think I can speak for all art design institutions when I say we would prefer not to see work done on lined paper with the frills that you just ripped out of your notebook. Again, the professional aspect of it is going to be important with how it's seen. Many schools will outline exactly what they're looking for in their portfolio. Actually, all of them will on their website. And if that's confusing, I know I'm friends with other representatives at other institutions. Many of them are so eager to talk to students. I know I am. We love sitting down with students and their families, and oftentimes it's easier to schedule a Zoom or a phone call to go through specifically what that unique university wants inside their portfolios. Because again, we're all looking for something slightly different. So a lot of schools also are going to ask for that range, that diversity in a portfolio. They'll ask for some still lifes, some charcoals, maybe an oil painting. And the reason why they're going to ask for these is so that the school knows the student has the foundation of their artistic future ahead of themselves, already established. These courses are incredibly rigorous, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Common misconception with art and design is, the classic easy A. At SCAD specifically, classes are 2.5 hours long, and the vast majority of that is going to be in the studio. We're 100% project-based, and our courses are rigorous. And this is not unique to SCAD. This is going to be across the board. So having those foundational skills down is something that a lot of schools really do want to see. Now, in terms of the performing arts, most commonly auditions, the universal one is going to be unified auditions. These are held all across the US in major cities, and they're actually really growing in popularity in the post-COVID world. Students are eager to get back in person, show off their talents in front of actual human beings, especially when you're doing that Shakespeare monologue. It has a little bit of a bigger impact when it's in person versus over Zoom like this. So they are growing in popularity. Again, schools are going to be looking for different things in terms of what they want in a performance. And it's not always just going to be monologues. So virtual submissions are also, of course, they're huge in the post-COVID world. More commonly than not, these are going to be like the visual arts portfolios, which are typically submitted through SlideRoom. These specifications will be on their website, but again, it's very helpful to talk to a representative from the school to know specifically what they're looking for. These can range anywhere from 1 to 10 minutes, so there's a very broad difference in that. And as with the visual arts, we do not want to distract from our work. More often than not, again, we're speaking generally here, but more often than not, typically this is going to be no props, just the performer. We want the art to speak for itself. We want a clean backdrop with none of those distractions. And if it is a virtual submission online, make sure the video is edited properly. We don't want 10 seconds in the beginning or the end. We don't want to see you come up and turn your camera off. Edit all that out. We want to be focused on your excellent work as a student. Don't distract from it. And then moving on from there, a little bit more about auditions. So I'm going to speak broadly about these and then kind of get into specifics, but more often than not, letters of recommendation are going to be required. These are going to come from teachers, coaches, directors of school plays, things like that. I know specific cases where we will accept college counselor recommendations, but more often than not, when we're in the nitty-gritty of it, we really like to see it coming from the students' sort of artistic instructors. Now, as a performer, it is vital that the student is prepared to sight read or sing, which pretty much means you're coming up, here's your script, read it, go. which can be very intense. It can be very intimidating. Make sure they've done their vocal warm-ups. They are kind of comfortable with that environment, and it's not the first time they've ever done it because it can be pretty intimidating. This is true of the visual arts as well. We are going to want to hear you talk about your piece, but beyond describing how it looks. So again, what mediums did you use? Was it done for class? What was the prompt? How did you effectively utilize the guidelines on here? What inspired you to create this piece? For specific portfolio reviews, there are national portfolio days, again, all over the country. This is a great place to showcase your work. But there are a few important notes I want to share with you all about this. The portfolio reviewers are there to be critical. They are not here to necessarily gas you up and make you feel like this is the best artwork they've ever seen in their life. This can be a huge shock to some students. They're going to give you very honest feedback. They're not here to fluff up your work. Encourage students to be confident in their work. Prepare them for this. This is a huge part of the artistic classroom as well. Critiques are going to be the center of most project-based classrooms. So being able to hear honest feedback on your work is going to be an essential part of being a student in the art and design world. Tell them to be confident, of course, and remember, this is more for counselors, but the people reviewing these portfolios, they are going to be looking at maybe upwards of 100 portfolios in a day. They're tired, they're exhausted. One of the best ways a student can advocate for themselves is to be concise and to be prepared. Of course, this spills over into the dance and theater auditions as well. Know what you're walking into. Are you expected to bring materials like a pre-recorded soundtrack? And trust me, it does not look great when you show up planning to do things a cappella and the people around you read the directions and were a little bit more prepared. Will I be performing with others or solo? Because that audition is also very, very different. Do you know the people? Have you ever worked with them before? These are all questions that students should be asking themselves. And more often than not, these auditions will have it specified. So do your homework, pretty much. Now, for theater specifically, are you walking in a character? Do they want to see your personality before? How does that audition look? And again, in the theme of being prepared, do you know the play? Do you know your lines? Do you know the theme? A note that we tell students we work with is it's always helpful to know a little bit about the history of the piece that you're performing. For example, one of our performing arts professors, I had the pleasure of working with them a few weeks ago. They tell their students, think about if this was written in 1948 in post-war France, just for an example. That gives you very valuable insight into the character that your student's going to be playing, the history behind it, and sort of what is expected of their behavior going into that audition. And then, of course, be confident. Confidence is going to be a key factor in all of these. It is extremely intimidating to put yourself out there for your work to literally get judged by other people. We understand that. The more confident you walk in, typically the more smooth things are going to go for you. So know what you're getting yourself into is incredibly important. So a little bit in terms of the timeline and the process. Spring of junior year is really when students should start thinking seriously about this. And this is especially important for the counselors too, because I know this is when you all start getting more involved in their busy lives. It's important for the student to ask themselves where they are in the process. If they haven't even considered putting a portfolio together, they need to start working on that. They need to be prepared to understand where their gaps are. And this comes from honest assessments of that talent. This initially is going to come from their teachers, from their college counselors. If they're drawing stick figures like I do, and they want to be, an oil painter, that's great. How are we going to work towards from the beginning of junior year to, when we submit our portfolio in our senior year? How are we going to get there? And unfortunately, a lot of that onus is laid on the counselors and the art teachers because they are so intimately involved with that work. Now is the time, of course, to keep working towards APs if you haven't taken them. We love working with students who have taken those APR portfolio classes because so much of the professionalism is built into the instruction of that course. Of course, we're not going to deny a student based on that, nor will many other schools, but it is a huge resource at the disposal of these students. And it can really help with that conversation going into senior year. On top of that, summer programs. So I know SCAD has a variety of summer programs, some that actually offer college credit, others that are just 5-day long courses. And we're definitely not unique in this. The vast majority of these schools are going to offer these programs. These summer programs are a trial run for these students. Do they really envision themselves in this environment? Did they have an idea of what an artistic education would look like versus the reality of it? It's much easier to gauge that for a 5-day period versus an entire first semester of your freshman year at college when you're trying to absorb everything else going on around you. So I always recommend these. And then another aspect of this, am I prepared for the rigor of these courses? As I mentioned earlier, these are intensive. They're not the easy A freshman year art class that so many students think it might be. And this is another sort of important one. Are these really the types of peers I want to be surrounded by? We all know the art kids. I work with them every day and I love them to death. But they can often be a different breed of person and not for everybody. Being in an institution with solely those specific types of people, and of course, all shapes and sizes, but that is a question that students really should be asking themselves. Then moving on to the summer. So summer is when I recommend these students start to move beyond the practical application and really start putting their application materials together. This is your opportunity to learn what different schools want and when they need them. On top of that, this is prime time to start communicating with parents and counselors. This requires a ton of logistics in terms of visits. So they really need to know where do they want to visit. And beyond that, especially for students who will be submitting an audition, where are these auditions being held? How many times do you need to audition for them? And where specifically are they? Are they in person? Are they online? Do they offer multiple forms of submission? What are they looking for? And I'm actually very glad that the slide is outlined up here because the logistics of this can be absolutely daunting, especially if students want to look at multiple schools, they want to audition for multiple as well. The artistic application can be much more involved than your standard college application, and families need to be prepared for that in college. And yes, of course, it can absolutely add up financially too. So that needs to be a question that they hammer out before it's too late, because it can be quite the investment. Now, fall of senior year. So hopefully around this time, families have an idea of what their timeline's looking like in terms of auditions, portfolios, physically visiting these schools. It's one thing to see them online, but whole different story visiting them in person and feeling that energy around you. As I'm sure you're very well aware. A note about auditions. Auditions are competitive and they are very, very busy. They need to be booked as soon as possible because they're on a first come, first serve basis, especially at unified auditions, which are typically the bigger ones. If a student is dead set on the performing arts, These auditions should be a priority on their fall calendars. Many auditions are capped at a certain number, and again, on a first come, first served basis. So it's important that they don't potentially miss one because they fail to do their due diligence in these. I've seen it happen before. It's heartbreaking. So the best we can do to avoid that, the better off we're going to be. On top of that, schedule portfolio counseling, if not a formal portfolio review. Most schools are going to offer these. Again, portfolios are not one size fits all. This should be done in the late summer, early fall. So if you do have gaps in your portfolio, or if they do have some bigger notes, or they're incredibly critical of it, you got time to fill in those missing pieces. Grades, of course, are going to be universally important. Just to touch on the point again of academic rigor, the coursework in these schools is hefty, and good grades show the ability to succeed in these environments. Most of these schools are going to be looking at senior year grades as well. It can affect scholarship. It can affect a placement in the actual university itself. So of course, it is always important to avoid the senior spring. I was guilty of that myself, but as best as they can combat it, we definitely want to encourage them to do that. And then just to put a bit of a bow on this, these schools are incredibly competitive. Especially because we as institutions are serving such specific niches. These programs are very specific to very small aspects of industry, and there are only a handful of schools that offer these. And all these schools are trying to accommodate a high number of students because these degrees are so concentrated. It's going to be selective. There's potential of heartbreak, but I would encourage you to encourage your students. Be as prepared as possible. Talk to the representatives. If there's a path forward that we can work together on, more often than not, 9 times out of 10, we are going to do our best to accommodate. Specifically, my role, especially this time of year, specifically at SCAD, is to advocate for my students. It's my favorite part of the job, and the heartbreak can be real. It can be intimidating, but these students are really fortunate to have great guidance counselors like y'all. I'll see if I can't leave my contact info here at the end if you have any questions or want to contact me individually. But thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Chuck. It's greatly appreciated. Expertise is greatly appreciated. And Chuck is going to stay on our presentation for the rest. So there will be opportunities for some Q&A at the end. All right. And also, please feel free if you have a direct question you want to ask Chuck about SCAD, or if you want to, again, ask something in a larger group, we'll have a space to do that at the end. So Chuck provided a lot of space and opportunity for us to get an overview of the process on the college side, from auditions to portfolios, even the timing for our students. And obviously, us as college counselors, we play a role in assisting students through this process. So the first one was talking about helping students determine the requirements for the different fine arts and performing arts programs. Again, that's a little bit of hand-holding. It can be just in regards to making sure students and families understand the details of it. I rely on the fact that I've worked with students who are going through this process many times before, and I kind of go in with the understanding that my students who are going through this now, they're going through it for the first time. So there might be some details or bullet points that they might not be as familiar with. So being able to help kind of go through and read it line by line, although it might take some additional time, could just be helpful in making sure that the students know exactly what they need to prepare for, what questions they need to have, and what follow-up they need to do on their end to make sure their application is ready for the fall. Helping students to understand that art comes in various forms in the higher ed world is also an aspect that I like to share. That difference between conservatories, a BA and a BFA, again, really paints that picture pretty vividly of how students can engage in the arts. You could do it where, again, it's your sole focus through conservatories. But if you find yourself as a student who is maybe a little bit undeclared, or a student of many talents and many interests, and art may be one of them, the opportunity to do it at a traditional liberal arts or an institution that has a little bit more of a flexible academic curriculum can provide them space to do that, where they don't have to give up on their love for arts, but they also know that they don't have to rely on that as their sole focus or their sole opportunity at a profession once they're 4 years in college are up. And finally, for our students, talking about managing expectations, it is. I think when students hear art, the immediate feel is, okay, well, that means it might be a little bit easier. And I talk to students about that on both the academic side as well as on the performance and portfolio side. The academic side is, students and not students, but college staffs and college admissions offices are expecting students to come in academically competitive no matter where they are applying to. So the grades still matter. But then on top of that, and they're still very competitive in that way. But I also try to encourage students that even though, and just like athletes, you might be the best player or you might be the best artist in our school, but you are now throwing your talents or your creations into the pool of competitive competitive students from across the world. And sometimes that is obvious that could bear different results than you used to. If you're used to always getting the lead play, if you're used to always getting the prize in your artwork, it might be a little bit disappointing if you don't get the type of response in the auditions or in the portfolio reviews that you're usually accustomed to. So telling students to kind of balance that out and figure that part out beforehand also goes a long way. There are a number of useful resources that I would hope you would consider utilizing throughout. With regards to number one, we have a couple different articles that are listed up here from the Chronicle. We also have the various art majors and programs, colleges that are out there that you can provide some insight to or list for your students if that's in their college list. Um, Also, a list of the portfolio days. Slide Room is actually one of uh, the platforms that students use to submit their portfolios. So getting used to or getting familiar with that, I think would also help you out with regards to when you're sitting down with a student or a parent to help them navigate this process, right? I think it's always okay if we say it's something that we don't know or that we might need to go back and get some additional information. But if we can familiarize ourselves with it a little bit ahead of time, it might help to ease the concern of the student who's coming in a little bit worried about their process as well. Okay. So again, you will have access to these. They will be sent out and you'll be able to utilize them for yourself. B, I'm gonna toss this over to you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Joaquin. So here we've compiled a list of both programs for theater specifically, that require an audition and others that don't require an audition. And my colleagues have done a great job talking about, things to expect as part of the audition process. And things for the student and families to think about as they prepare for schools that might have an audition process. I think it's interesting to think about the art list as it could either be the non-art school with the art school, or excuse me, non-art school list with the art school list. And you can even add art school without a supplement list. It's almost like thinking about them as an athlete, right? And that just, I think in my mind, helps cover bases from a lot of different places, whether it's admission rates, costs, right? Sometimes, as Chuck was mentioning, this can be a costly process to apply to places that do require auditions. So having some that don't require an audition or a portfolio can help bring costs down. So I think it's always good just to have a mix of options for families. And these lists aren't exhaustive, but it's somewhere that you can start. And as Joaquin mentioned, we're going to send these slides out and you can check them out later on, or when you need it for a student. But in addition to starting here, using some of the books that we've talked about or other resources, check in with your arts faculty. Sometimes they know of programs that could be really good fits for a specific student. I remember working with a faculty member who really knew a student who played the violin well, and she recommended University of Houston for their music program, and I had never heard of it. And this was pretty early on in my career. So that just having conversations like that with your arts faculty can be really helpful. So definitely feel free to utilize your faculty as well as your listservs. NACAC, Axis, your local ACAC listservs can also come up with some really, really good ideas. Next slide, please. So same thing for visual arts programs. So on the left, you'll see places that do require a portfolio and places that don't require a portfolio, although, there are some with, parentheses, right? Like SCAD. They require a portfolio to be considered for scholarships. Marist, specific programs require portfolios. So it's up to the student to know the exact requirements for each school. And as Chuck mentioned earlier, every school is going to be different in their requirements. Some, like Chuck mentioned, will require a hefty number. And I've worked with kids who've had to put together a large portfolio. And so planning ahead is a good idea, because trying to put it together those 3 weeks before a deadline is not fun for the student or for the counselor. And if you also plan ahead, you can attend one of those handy dandy national portfolio days. And as Chuck said, that they're not meant to fluff up a student, but they're really helpful for the kids who really do want critical feedback. And it can just kind of be like a sort of glimpse into what an art education could look like. So anyway, as I said, with the previous slide, this isn't an exhaustive list, so just make sure you're checking in with your faculty, you're making use of your colleagues either through Access or NACAC or your local ACAC when you're trying to crowdsource or research programs for your student. All right, next slide, please. And let's just go through some myths and assumptions about the process, because you will hear many. I think the one that I've dealt with the most is that last bullet point. I did well at a college summer program, so I'll be admitted there for sure. And as many of us know, the fact that you've participated in a summer program doesn't necessarily mean that that's an automatic acceptance into the school itself, right? You still have to go through the college process. You still have to submit a transcript. As Chuck was saying, grades matter. So it's not as though just because you're part of something that's related to the school doesn't mean that it means admissions. And I've had other tricky situations where maybe a student has attended a summer program at a particular school and they've connected with a faculty member there. And so now they think that this is their in, this is how they're going to be admitted. And many times those, well, it was a good connection that they had, and it didn't really lead into something else. So I think, just the kids are really impressionable, and so they'll hear things in certain ways. And so it's just really important for them to understand, right? Like when a faculty member is being supportive versus when they're just kind of doing their job. So it's kind of on us as their college counselor to really help them suss out and understand the reality of the application process. Earlier, Chuck also mentioned um, awards don't necessarily equate to admissions, right? So the fact that a student has received a ton of awards, like this example, I won the visual arts award at my high school, or I won this national award in this particular um, style of art, doesn't necessarily mean that they will get admitted to that school. As it was mentioned, the fit with an art program is really more focused on the style of art that that school offers and not necessarily on the accolades that the student has received. It really has to be a good fit and match for both the kid and the student. The school doesn't want to waste the student's talents on a program that is not going to allow them to grow those. So that's why it's really important that the student does their research and that they're really looking into who's teaching and the type of work that they might be producing while they're there. Um, so I think with that said, we have about 15 minutes for questions. So maybe we just kind of open it up to people's questions.
Absolutely, my friend. So please feel free. I have the chat open. We're here. It was, B, as you were talking about it, I was looking at that second bullet point, and I'm just remembering how many conversations I've had like this. The chair of the music department, they reached out to me and said I was a lock, and it does these conversations. It's silly, it's not silly, but it is interesting how they do overlap with a lot of the conversation that we have with athletes. So
Totally.
right, for some of our students, who, might have gotten a good nod from a college professor, where, you don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but you do have to encourage students to think about it a little bit more holistically, right? That professor might have saw a piece of your work, and
Right,
while your art might have spoken volumes, there's still a rest of your application that needs to come along with it, right?
right.
Personal statement, your essays, your transcript, the recommendations, and do those same things speak to what that professor saw, right? Does that whole story
Hmm.
come to play?
Hmm.
And also, the professor might not know the institutional needs of that college that particular year.
Yes.
So it can provide some mixed messaging that the kids receive, but
Hmm.
um, I think in some cases I think it is um, helpful for us to challenge students a bit in when they are hearing these messages. Um, Encourage, if the relationship is really that strong, to keep it connected by following up, sending emails, continuing to engage in the conversations.
Hmm.
But it being the final ticket or final straw in your admissions to that school, I think, again, encouraging students to really think differently about that.
Yeah, agreed. Yep. Yeah. Have others had um experiences like the ones that we've described or
I have a
um
raised hand from Antonio. If
yeah.
you, if Antonio
Hey
want
guys.
to share,
Yeah, no, I just had a question actually, because I mean, I was a music major way back in the day, and I went to Ithaca and studied music, but that was 20 something years ago. So like, I'm a new college counselor. I was on your side, I was on the college side for 20 years, but really didn't focus a lot in on portfolios. I was at a state school that didn't require that. I guess my question is this: I have students now who are reaching pretty high at some of these universities academically. but they're looking at some of these like BFA programs or musical theater programs or whatever it is. Is it kind of like sports in that regard as well, as if they might not be there academically, but if they go in there and knock their socks off with the audition, they could potentially make it to some of these schools that are kind of unlikelies or reach for them academically? Um, or, I mean, will it's a lot of the weight be on the audition rather than the academics, or do they need both?
Yeah, so again, not to give you a non-answer, but so much of that is going to be based on the individual school. If they are applying to a school's performing arts program, and again, they absolutely knock that audition out of the park, that is going to be weighed fairly heavily. Versus at a school like, say, SCAD even, where we don't require portfolios, it's for scholarship only. Those grades are going to be pretty important to us. And I would say in that case, it's going to be very important for the student to be in communication with whoever the representative is, with the school as their admission advisor. There are going to be opportunities for letters of explanation, or the supplemental materials can really go a long way. And I know that's true for many schools beyond SCAD even. So yeah, certainly there's hope for them. Now, it's going to be sort of a case-by-case basis. A student with a 1.2 GPA is going to have a really compelling audition, to be honest with you. But generally, that communication with the school itself and the student could play into that kind of deciding factor, to be honest with you. In a school where portfolio is required, then if it's too late to focus on the GPA, I say they pour as much energy as possible into that performance, that portfolio, what have you. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. If anybody from the high school side, I forget who's Joaquin, are you from the high school side?
Yeah, me and B are both from the high school side. And I used to work, I worked in admissions prior to going to the high school side. I would say on my admission side of the world, and I was at York College of Pennsylvania, which is a regional, less selective, medium-sized institution in central PA. And I was also at Swarthmore College, highly selective, small liberal arts college. And I have seen ways in which in like committee meetings and where the push of athletic recruit was there. I haven't had as many moments on that side of the desk where I saw the push from an artistic faculty member help get a student over the hump in the same way. I often tell students that it's actually probably a little bit more competitive for them if they're also, because the school in my mind wants both the academics and the talent to meet at those highly selective institutions. So I tell students the realities of like that the academics do, that there might be a little bit of a push, but I wouldn't necessarily count on that as your saving grace in this process. I would look for, obviously have my reach schools on there, but also have some mid-range and likelies to balance out my list.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I guess to be very specific, I'm working with kids now who want to go to Michigan, right? And they're nowhere near Michigan's academic profile, but they want to go for the BFA in like musical theater or something, and or theater. And so I'm telling them it's a reach or an unlikely, but I wasn't sure if maybe their performance could supersede some of those academic factors. So it's kind of wanted to hear from an experience, like someone who's might have had that same kind of situation. But thank you. I think it was helpful.
No problem. B, did you want to add anything?
No, because I think like you, Joaquin, I've sort of experienced the same thing. I've also been in admissions. I was at Stanford and MIT, and the grades just needed to be there as well. For athletics, I think it was a little different because you had the whole academic index factor that could like, you know, help with the academic side. If like, let's say the kid was a super talented athlete and maybe the academics weren't quite there, when you had the whole team, that could help with some of that. And with the arts, it's a little bit different in that regard since it's not a team type of thing. So yeah, in my experience, uh, at selective places like Michigan and Swarthmore and places like that, the academics need to be there.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it.
Mhm.
We have about 5 more minutes left. If we're funneling any questions, please feel free. If not, we'll also give you 5 more minutes back in your day or in your afternoon. But we are very happy that you came out, very happy that you listened, shared, hopefully thought about the process and really thought about ways that you could help and support your students. Antonio, is your hand raised again, or is this
Yeah, sorry,
great?
I thought of something else. This is, I guess, more for Chuck. I, along with like the art and the music and theater and stuff, architecture, that fall under like sort of all the same sort of like guidelines that you would kind of see there.
So architecture is going to be an exception, sort of an exception to this rule, for a few reasons. Sort of behind the scenes, architecture accreditation is incredibly difficult to receive in the first place and also maintain. For most schools, it has to be renewed every 6 months. So the students we look for that, we don't typically require SATs. We're going to require that for architecture. This is true for most schools as well. We're going to want to see those math courses, the strong skills in mathematics. It's in an already rigorous environment. Architecture is incredibly rigorous. So that is going to be a situation where we really want to see those strong grades, and we really want to see strong SATs as well.
All right. Any other questions, Antonio?
No, I think I'm good. I appreciate you guys.
No problem, my friend. Anytime. Any questions, anytime. All right. Well, thank you very much again for joining the program. I'm sure we'll see you at a college counselor tour or access program near you. All right. You all have a wonderful day. See you, friends.